Okay, so thank you for joining us for this panel about brand marketing, and one we would rename it Game as a Brand. So today we have Pascal, Janos, and Robin with us to talk about this. I'll let you guys introduce yourself before we get started. So Robin, yeah?
So, my name's Rowan Squire. I'm marketing at PlayRaven. I've been in Finland for 5 years, actually, so I first came here to work with Rovio. And yeah, PlayRaven is a Helsinki-based game development startup. There's about 22 of us, and our main focus is on creating new IP, new strategy IP.
This is Janos. I just recently came to actually Helsinki, starting with a new company, Armada Interactive. We just recently got funded in the beginning of the year and working on a new mobile RTS title in the field of marketing from my end.
And I'm Pascal Clareus. I'm a marketing and growth consultant. I've been doing marketing for 19 years, so since long before we had a ton of data. And nowadays I consult for Seriously, Ubisoft, and a bunch of others.
And I'm Jean-Philippe Descas, and I'm the co-founder of Pokewell, which is a strategy and marketing agency for mobile games. So yeah, so as I was saying today, I'd like to talk about brand marketing and how that is useful or not for mobile games. And to get started, maybe let's start with a short definition of what is brand marketing so that we're all on the same page here. And Robin, again, if you want to get started with this.
So, yeah, so I guess when thinking about branding, it can be quite sort of a nebulous kind of thing. You can go around in circles thinking of what is a brand and so on. But I guess the way I see branding is sort of establishing an identity for your product or service. And I guess brand marketing is the sort of vehicle to sort of communicating that through various different touch points. So that's how I would say it.
Okay. And do you guys see an opposition between brand marketing and user acquisition? I know that in mobile games, which is very data-driven, usually when we relate to marketing, we think about user acquisition and we try to track and monitor everything. How you guys would see that working with actually brand marketing?
So yeah, just to carry on then, I guess I think branding's about sort of a consistent message. Traditionally, people sort of pick a certain message, a certain look, feel, and they make sure that they communicate that consistently. Whilst I guess the user acquisition side is a bit more about sort of testing and fine-tuning. So there can be a sort of conflict between that, but also I think kind of work together. I think at least at PlayRaven, one thing we try and do is establish a brand, have some conviction behind what we're doing, but then also test. So I don't think they have to be apart, but traditionally perhaps it's a sort of tricky one.
Yeah, I think a word that Robin said that is very important is identity. So UA or marketing could focus solely on effectiveness. Do you convert? Do you acquire a user at which price? When you build a brand, you also think about which users, how do you acquire them, which platforms do you work with, because it can be that sometimes it doesn't give the image that you wanna give. When you think about brand, you don't only think about video games, but also about Lego, about Nike. Nike is not just sporting goods for sale; it's just do it. It gives you their philosophy and what they want to represent, what they want to be about.
Okay.
And of course, in this sense, it complements each other if thought out. But you can totally do marketing without branding, and the branding is extra. I think marketing and UA would be short-term focused, where branding would be long-term focused. Do we get something on the long run from it?
Exactly. I mean, that would have been more or less also my thought, coming more from the media angle and the media management angle, that essentially when you're working towards establishing a brand, you are technically investing into your future. Because when you're establishing a new IP, the initial investment will not be essentially harnessed back on that IP, but the next title and the title after, when you already reach the level of awareness and raise the interest through essentially, the next big game coming out from a franchise. And I think that's the critical difference. User acquisition is usually geared towards more or less a direct response and install a certain engagement level in the game and trying to gear toward it, as opposed to a more long-term strategic investment into establishing an IP, a brand.
Okay, and so we're in Finland, and I think that when we think about brand marketing for mobile games here, I mean, at least for me, I have two mobile game developers that directly comes to my mind. I'm thinking Rovio, and I'm thinking Seriously. I think, Pascal, you know both of them pretty well. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about why those developers decided to go for brand marketing beyond UA?
All right, so I think you also forgot Clash of Clans. Don't
sorry.
Insult anything. Rovio, I think, Robin, is maybe even better placed than I am to speak about
Are you
it.
trying to pass the buck?
No, but to talk about Seriously, I think Andrew Stalbo is the most interesting person about when talking about brands for Seriously. Because before being at Seriously, he was at Rovio. Before being at Rovio, it was at 20th Century Fox, working on Hollywood properties, working on making The Simpsons tap out, working on launching Avatar, working on building a Rio into more than a movie but a franchise, and having that little idea of doing Angry Birds Rio. Then he joined Rovio, impressed by the reach that they had, and with that thinking that was formulating in his head that mobile games have a chance today to do Hollywood in reverse, which means instead of doing the big movie and then the merchandising in the mobile games, you start with the mobile games because it is infinitely cheaper than to make a AAA movie. And you get a ton of engagements with millions of fans through which you have a brand you can build. And what I really like about the way he speaks, for example, there is a principle that he always goes back to and that I hear very little in mobile gaming. It is the triple C of building a family brand. And the triple C are characters, comedy, conflict. The same stuff that you would find in a movie. You don't have an animation franchise like Minions if you don't have characters, conflict, and then comedy. And all of that is taken into account in two best fiends. For example, some of the writing is done by the next The Simpsons screenwriter. The music is done by Hector Pereira, who did the music for Despicable Me and Minions as well. So it's really about bringing the best talent in their field to build entertainment. And the characters are drawn by Miguel Francisco, who drew all the characters in Angry Birds Star Wars. So he has a touch, it's hard to deny it, and it seems to be appealing. All that was thought out almost more than the game genre. The franchise was built in a way that it can be taken into different genres of gaming, can be developed into an animation series, and can be developed into merchandising. Now, in which order and at which point, that depends on various success parameters and connections. But it's about leaving the doors open and building all these elements before even taking out on the market with your first game.
Yeah, and I'd also add that Seriously are actually, they have this big brand and stuff, but they're actually quite focused company. They're focused on building a brand and focused on sort of building Best Fiends. That's their number one focus. And then when they release more games, they're going to be under the Best Fiends umbrella. So it's quite clever what they're doing, and it's not something that I think makes sense for every company. It really comes down to a strategy and focus thing. But for them, I think it makes sense.
And in your case, Janos, for instance, at Armada, I don't know if you can talk about it now, but as their marketing person for Armada, do you consider branding in your strategy for the upcoming games?
Yes, so branding, like I said, is a long-term investment piece. I think when developing a game, and especially before getting into the times when UA becomes relevant like a soft launch, branding has to be thought through in terms of the theme of the game, the characters. Is it something that you think you can extend in terms of a world? So is it something where you will be able to essentially build a successful franchise of, if needed, multiple games, multiple titles? And to be fair, granted that we have a relatively good senior crew, we are also proactively looking and trying to shape a little bit the storyline of the game to essentially allow for certain cross-fertilization, like Pascal was mentioning, for instance, a movie title, if the opportunity would arise or to come, so that the whole, how should I put, the ecosystem, the universe that we are creating is more or less universally applicable.
Okay. And you, Robin, with PlayRaven?
So yeah, so we obviously try and, we have sort of a blue ocean strategy to how we approach the market. So our main focus is on sort of creating differentiated products with unique mechanics, and really sort of testing the market and exploring the market. So that's kind of our primary focus.
Okay.
But then on the brand side, obviously we try and make sure that the identity of a game, the look, the art style, the theme, is kind of unique and also tailored towards what we feel, would be the audience that we want to go for. So we don't do that in a sort of data-driven way. We mainly focus on that comes from sort of creative conviction from our side, and then we will sort of verify and become data-informed through A/B testing within certain parameters that we've established. I think there are a lot of companies that do a pretty good job of sort of creating data-driven sort of games and IP and brand. But I guess kind of my sort of approach to that is I think it must come from somewhere, from a place of conviction, because basically you couldn't A/B test the sort of Nirvana Nevermind album cover, right? No one would pick a cover where there's a baby swimming after a dollar bill.
Yeah.
But it's probably one of the most iconic album covers of all time. So you've got to start somewhere.
Okay, cool. And now moving towards more, what are the levers in order to create brand awareness? So we can use TV, we can use press, we can use influencers. Pascal, you were talking about this before. I mean, for you, what would be a good mix in terms of levers that you can use to create brand awareness, to have a proper branding strategy, and what would you recommend? So if any of you guys want to start.
I think it's a great question in the sense that there is no strategy that fits all, because that's exactly what you have to think about when you think about branding. You don't just want press, you want this and that publication, because they're going to give you credibility within the existing community in the theme that you are going after. Same when you are picking your influencers, you're not going to pick ones that could alienate just a portion of your core audience, because that would ruin your message and that would ruin your long-term effort. So, and even when you are communicating, when you are driving assets out there, you want to be on brand. So it's really about thinking who you are, and there are a few exercises that a lot of companies would think that this is scholar, to not start talking with insulting words, but they think it's a waste of time to think about what are your brand values, what are the 5 things you stand for, why? Not just how you picked up 5 great sentences now, but why? And how are you going to show that? How are you going to live that? How are you going to instill this culture to your employees and then to the world out there? Once you have done that extra work, these 2 steps back, it's easier to jump, because if you've done it, if you know yourself better, or if you know the brand you want to project better, it's easier to select these are the 3 influencers that really go well with this demographic, this team, and what we want to convey. So once your message is clearer, I think your strategy kind of falls into place.
Yeah, I think from a levers perspective, I think it kind of depends on the game. Depends on, who the game's for, the stage of the game, who you're going after, and what the focus of the company is. For us, we've done obviously things like press. That really has mainly helped the company, I think, in just getting our message out, letting people know what we're about. In terms of the game, I think it's the best place for us to start has been sort of trying to figure out the UA side, making sure we've got the UA sort of funnel in place and everything sorted on that side. And I would see the other levers like YouTube and things like that as a way of sort of scaling up in the future. Okay. But of course, then, there are some exceptions to the rule. I think seriously going all in on YouTube makes total sense. And I also like the way that they don't just pick one video. They don't just go to PewDiePie and give him a bunch of money, get one video, and then kind of look and to see how many installs they've got, because that probably wouldn't work out well for them. They actually just go all in. They kind of go big or go home with these kind of things. And all of their campaigns relate back to the game. So they'll do collaborations with Ellen and things like that. And they won't be wasted, because they're actually, you can just go in the game and there's a continuation of that. It references Ellen, it's got the YouTubers hidden in there and stuff like that. And I think that makes sense, and it's kind of pulling it back to the community. So if you've got an esports title, think about the community. Where are you going to do, what levers would you use? Would you go on Twitch? Would you do live streaming? Probably, because that's probably where they are. That's where the audience is, and that's kind of how you can build that. But then from an ROI perspective, perhaps it's good to have the UA stuff sorted as well.
Okay.
To bounce back on this, it's absolutely true that they don't just do one shots and they don't just think about the money. In fact, they try to approach each relationship as a partnership. So PewDiePie is a partner for them. So has become KSI, so has become F2 Freestylers, so is Norwich City, the Coca-Cola Premiership Club, but formerly Premier League club. And when you have partners, and you've known that very well with Angry Birds, you can certainly do something else 2 months later when you have that other event that you're doing anyway, and you can actually bring two partners together maybe on this one. And YouTubers are partners, but there are others. Like Kid Robot is a partner on the merchandising side of things. And it's not just, all right, make us rich. It's really about what can we bring to you, what can you bring to us, and also in terms of brand, what can we bring to one another, not just money.
And it sort of goes back to what Eric was saying there about kind of letting the community form organically around a game, right? You can't force it. You can't just go, this is how we want you to behave as our players. You've got to kind of look at what they're doing and figure out what the best touch points are with them and how to best leverage them.
You can't force it, but you can accelerate it.
Sure.
But also, Pascal, to bounce on what you were saying before, I like what you were saying about the brand values. I remember a speech I had from Didier Rapaport, who is the CEO of Appen, which is a dating app, so not in games, but in the app world, who was saying that the first person he hired, actually, before even the company was created, was someone to define what are the values of his app, of his brand, so that he can actually build on top of this and select what is going to be the message and what is the appropriate marketing for that.
Yeah, and think of it as a person. You used to be a teenager, and then you grew up and you became an adult, and by becoming an adult you know much better who you are, what are your limits, what are your weaknesses, what are your strengths, and what image you want to convey. Miss or succeed is another thing, but I think it's that. Branding is about not that we are making money and that we have some success, not that we can pay the bills for the next 1 or 2 years, because that's usually your problem as a startup in the beginning, funding. Once you have that, you start thinking about what do we do for the next 10 years? What do we do for the next 100 years, like Rovio would put it. And then who you are becomes important. You have to grow up as a company as you would as a person. And that is defining yourself. What you do, what you don't do as well.
Okay. If we get a little bit more into the data world, because I think also a lot of people here are interested into how you track, how you monitor branding, because even though it's long term, like as you say, people need to pay bill and people need actually understand how to track brand awareness. So can you guys maybe share any tools that you're using or any tips in order to make it a little bit more concrete and be able to measure it?
I don't know if I have any tips, but I think it's probably getting easier to track, the return on investment when it comes to a particular campaign. YouTubers are using now tracking links. You have pretty good analytics software that you can go in and look at, and if you time TV campaigns right or whatever, you can kind of figure that out, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah, so I think in this sense, the attribution providers are now stepping up their game quite substantially. So I think more and more of these providers are providing essentially trivia attribution that are taking certain audio cues, for instance, from a spot and the likes. I think the general way that I have seen in the industry, having worked at Flare Games with some of these campaigns, was usually the organic decomposition modeling. So technically, you try to decompose a specific time period of the organics, try to find your baseline, and essentially, by ceteris paribus, the incremental will be the campaign effect itself. Having said that, I think what is also relatively important to note here that branding campaigns, most of the cases are really difficult to back up to something what you would be considering a competitive CPI level. And that's something that I've been trying to argue for quite a while with pretty many of my colleagues, that for branding, there are different key brand metrics like Net Promoter Score, like different awareness metrics that are way better measures of the campaign campaign performance than just looking at a purely financial effective cost per install and how would that eCPI compare to our LTV.
Yeah, and I think also some higher level indicators, like is your curve going up constantly for the last few months? And then looking at your marketing mix as being effective or not. I think data scientists who really try to get it down to the comma sometimes miss the point about are we growing and are we growing fast? And sometimes removing the thing that is maybe a little bit costly or not as effective as the other breaks the equilibrium of the whole thing. Now, on YouTube in particular, you're right that it's not that easy to track because, yes, there are links, but most people don't click on it. One good way to incentivize them to click on it is to use deep links. For example, a company like Trofit in Israel, where you bake in-app purchases of virtual currency because it's the race to zero. We are all free. So value-driven marketing is kind of dead on the App Store unless you are better than free, which is start with 500 gold right now. That's an incentive to click on the link, and that betters the accuracy of your tracking. And also the hockey sticks. If you do something and you see a hockey stick in your statistic, repeat it again 1 month later and see again a hockey stick. You don't know accurately how much you get from the operation, but you know the hockey stick comes from there because you just did it twice now. And then you basically benchmark how much money you're making that day versus how money the hockey stick has cost you. So you go to a higher level. You don't go that granular. I think it's going the road in reverse. When I started my career, we had little to no data. Then we started to have a little bit, then more and more. So we digged deeper and deeper. From time to time, it's healthy to go back to the higher level and just say how you're doing as a business and not just, am I hitting 2.1 or 2.2 here, which can be pointless sometimes.
Okay. I think I have a last question regarding what we could call growth hacking techniques to create brand awareness, because I mean, in the cases that we mentioned before, like Supercell or Rovio or Seriously, those companies have quite deep pockets in order to invest into branding. Can you guys share maybe any tips again or techniques of companies and developers that are actually doing and creating brand awareness for, let's say, a cheaper amount of money?
I think you had an example you wanted to mention.
True, that's correct. I mean, there's the example of Samurai Siege, and especially with Space Ape Games that we've been working with, who were actually creating a community of influencers within the game. So they were actually recruiting some influencers and some streamers from other games, getting them into Samurai, creating a clan, helping them out, and those guys were acting as promoters on their YouTube channels, on their Twitch channels, etc. And it was working out pretty well for them because they were not paying them. Well, with time, of course, but not with money.
Yeah, I guess, growth hacking as well is kind of quite a nebulous term, as I said earlier with branding. But yeah,
it's marketing that works.
It's basically a word for opportunism, right? It's just being opportunistic, seeing something and being like, oh, let's do that, or figuring something out. So, but Rovio was really good at growth hacking, I guess. Their videos, their YouTube videos had hundreds of millions of views just because they figured out that they could put the video on the pause menu and people would click it and go through, and then they'd do a big campaign during Super Bowl and get people to look in the game for a special egg or something, and then that would lead to the trailer, and all these users would be bouncing around on a sort of just bouncing between different games and titles and videos and just making the whole brand stronger. So Rovio was and is very good at that.
Yeah, and I think the example you mentioned is very good because, of course, the tier 1 YouTubers cost a lot of money. unless you get incredibly lucky, but that will happen organically. They will pick up your game. It's not that you pitch it to them. On the other hand, the tier 2 and tier 3 YouTubers, the people with 100,000 subscribers, or even up to 1 million subscribers, if your game is a great fit for their demographic, for example, if they play a lot of Clash of Clans and you have a better version of Clash of Clans or a different version of Clash of Clans, or if you are working on awesome nodes, you could go to Yorkscast because they're working on Minecraft. So it's about affinity in this case. You try to dilute the money aspect by finding someone who doesn't have too much ego and see how this is interesting for his community. And then, like you said, it's about the effort. It's about putting time in to save money. Although the tier 1 and tier 2 thing can help each other. For example, if your community team is already contacting all these hundreds of YouTubers that you think are fit for you, or Twitchers, or Instagrammers, or Snapchatters, but you have maybe $50,000 lying around, and you have a tier 1 YouTuber who is a great fit, who is looked up to by the others, and is willing to do that video. If he makes it, it will be easier for you to go after the tier 2 influencers and convince them to do videos about the game for free, because they've seen the star, the person they look up to, already cover it. And they don't necessarily know you paid for it, even if it's said. The world is fast today.
Okay.
Also, I was just going to say, on a really, really simple level, like the simplest way of sort of growth hacking could just be to put like a link to Facebook in the game in a really like obvious place, and then you suddenly get loads of people on a Facebook page. You know, it always bummed me out when, you know, there'd be a link that'd be like in the settings menu of a game. It's like no one's going to go there. Only people who are like really annoyed and want to contact customer support will end up on that page. Whilst if you do a nice little guy with a sign saying like us, then suddenly you've got, you know, 500,000 users on your Facebook page that you can re-engage.
Actually, that's a really good point. And if you look at Best Fiends right now, at the end of the level, when you win 3 keys, you go into that little screen when you can spend the 3 keys. The first time, you're gonna see a link there to win a diamond. If you visit Facebook, you can, then when it's done, you get incentivized to follow Twitter. Then when it's done, you get incentivized to take a look at Instagram. Then when it's done, you get incentivized to subscribe on YouTube. We want you, and we want you everywhere. Oh, Snapchat, I forgot Snapchat.
You've got me.
Yeah, it's really about keeping you everywhere, because the community is the value. The platform on which you have it, it's just a rent. You don't own your YouTube channel, you don't own your Facebook space, you're renting it. You're renting it for free, but you're renting it, they can take it away from you. So you need to have that that faithfulness, it's not the right word I was looking for, that fidelity, from that loyalty from the fans themselves. And that's where brand is interesting, because you get closer from Nike than the cheapest brand in the world somehow. You may buy the cheap shoes, but you know, with a brand, you follow them. And that means today we move from Facebook to WhatsApp to WeChat to wherever, you can easier convert them and convince them to follow you because they still like you. They have an emotional investment in you.
And also maybe plain and simple, just what we were talking about, essentially media exchanges. I do know for a fact that Flare Games have been extremely successful in this sense. So they were typically trying to collect the smaller guys who were promoting their games organically and offer them media placements like Flare Games UA ads. So they have been actually working with a couple of these influencers where they offered, you know, you could be essentially the star of our game. Then promote us, help us, and this way they essentially grow both the personal brand of an influencer as well as their own brand at the same time at pretty much essentially no cost.
Well, thank you very much, guys. Maybe we have a question from the room? Yeah.
Hello, thank you. It's really good. At what point does an IP become a brand?
That's a very good question.
Well, branding is a sort of nebulous term, right?
I think
So,
branding.
like, how I kind of think
and
about
you
it is
shouldn't
like...
I think we shouldn't confuse branding and brand. You can start thinking about branding as early as incubation, I would say. Once you start planning on paper, you should start about which brand you want to build. But it might take you years. It's like, when does Jerry Seinfeld becomes a brand instead of a comedian? When does Conan O'Brien becomes a brand rather than a talk show host? It's that you just became that big, that iconic, that recognized that you now are essentially a brand. Shooting for it is actually about keeping, I believe, and I will quote Niklas Head on this. Yeah, we go back to Rovio. Keeping the window of opportunity open as wide as you can for as long as you can. And so if you, for example, remove a few things that are very necessary in other entertainment sectors to make the game easier or cheaper, you are cutting legs and you are cutting opportunities without even considering them yet. So maybe keep an open mind and think kind of big. But don't expect to be big overnight. All these brands that we know, it took them years. Even Pokemon. If you would listen to my mom, Pokemon Go just happened overnight. But Pokemon happened in 1996, and the first big wave I've witnessed as a human being was 98, 99. So it takes waves. And 2 years ago, you were hearing stories about Angry Birds being down. I still think it's one of the top 3 biggest brands in mobile today, and you see it this year with the movie. All these things, it's hard to say. Is Best Fiends already a brand? I would argue that in France, Germany, and Russia, yes. In the US, not yet. It's too small.
I kind of consider that a brand is ultimately the values in action, and those actions are probably then all the marketing activities. So like the paid UA, all of it is going to come together to kind of guide the kind of, perception of the brand. And if you could do some things in one country that are very different to another, your brand is going to appear very different to different kind of demographics that you market. And I think Angry Birds has that because it appeals in very different ways to very different people. Some people see it as a kid's brand, some people see it as a game, some people see it as a movie. So like when you have all these so many different touch points, it can actually be quite difficult to actually say what is a brand. Would you agree?
Well, I think it comes back to sort of that dissonance between, the consistency of establishing a brand versus the inconsistency of testing and doing user acquisition and performance marketing, right? And I guess, I imagine that Rovio is actually trying to solve this by making sure that there are parameters in place to keep the consistency of the brand and keep, Angry Birds as what it stands for, but also make sure that they are responsible and are able to get a high conversion rate and get the app installs and so on and so forth. So yes, I would agree.